The 1962 medical file of Clairvius Narcisse does not describe a miracle, it describes a cold, calculated failure of the boundary between biology and the afterlife. When Narcisse walked into the Albert Schweitzer Hospital in Haiti, his lungs were seizing, his skin was turning a cyanotic blue, and his digestive system was in total collapse. Two American physicians, trained in the most rigorous clinical environments, monitored his decline until his heart stopped. There was no pulse, no breath, and no neurological response. They signed the death certificate. They watched his family bury him under a heavy concrete slab to prevent grave robbers. But 18 years later, when that same man stood in a crowded marketplace and spoke to his sister, the world was forced to confront a terrifying logical gap. If Narcisse was dead, who was the man standing in the sun? And if he wasn't dead, what had happened to him in that dark, subterranean silence? This is the forensic starting point for the mystery of the first zombie, a journey that leads away from Hollywood myths and into the visceral reality of neurochemical warfare, ancient parasitic evolution, and the systematic deletion of the human soul. To solve the mystery of the first zombie, we must first strip away the cinematic veneer of rotting flesh and look at the precision of the chemistry involved. The Haitian zombie is not a product of magic, but of a sophisticated pharmacological cocktail that exploits the human nervous system's most basic functions. The primary agent is tetrodotoxin, a neurotoxin found in the pufferfish that is 1,200 times more lethal than cyanide. It works by blocking the sodium channels in the nerve cells, effectively cutting the wires between the brain and the body. In a precisely measured dose, it doesn't kill, it induces a state of profound metabolic depression. The heart rate drops to less than 1 beat per minute. Respiration becomes so shallow it cannot be detected by a stethoscope or a mirror held to the nose. The body temperature plummets. To any external observer, the person is a corpse. But inside that frozen shell, the consciousness remains trapped. Narcisse later described the horror of being awake in the dark, hearing his sister's cry, feeling the weight of the coffin lid being nailed shut, and the terrifying finality of the earth hitting the wood. He was a prisoner in his own biological hardware, experiencing his own funeral with the lucidity of a nightmare. This leads to the first logical pivot in our investigation. If the death is chemical, then the resurrection must be psychological. When a zombie is exhumed by a Baker, a sorcerer of the secret societies, they are not brought back to life, they are brought back to a state of permanent cognitive fragmentation. This is achieved through the secondary administration of Datura stramonium, known locally as the zombie cucumber. This plant contains potent hallucinogens like atropine and scopolamine, which induce a state of delirium, amnesia, and extreme suggestibility. When a person who has just survived the trauma of being buried alive is suddenly pulled from the earth and fed a substance that erases their memory and identity, the brain undergoes a catastrophic collapse. The I, the ego, the personality, everything that makes a human a person, is deleted. They are left in a state of zombieism, a permanent trance where they can follow basic instructions but lack the will to resist. This was the fate of Narcisse, who spent years working on a plantation as a nameless laborer, a ghost in a machine, until his master died and the chemical leash was finally broken. But the mystery of the first zombie goes deeper than the shores of Haiti. To find the true origin, we have to look back to the 18th century, to the brutal sugar plantations of Saint-Domingue. In this era, the zombie was the ultimate social nightmare of the enslaved. The fear wasn't being eaten by a zombie, it was becoming one. In the theology of the enslaved, death was the only way to return to Lan Guinea, the ancestral home in Africa. But a zombie was someone who was denied even the peace of the grave. They were the undead who were forced to work for eternity. Historical records from this period describe mechanical workers who moved with a glazed expression, unresponsive to heat, pain, or exhaustion. While many historians dismiss this as a metaphor for the crushing weight of slavery, forensic analysis suggests something more sinister. There are accounts of overseers using local flora and fauna to subdue rebellious workers, creating a class of laborers who were biologically incapable of revolt. The first zombie, therefore, was not a monster of the night, but the first victim of a systematic campaign to turn the human body into a permanent tool of production. This brings us to a crucial analytical question: is the zombie state something that can occur naturally, without the intervention of a chemist or a sorcerer? The answer lies in the dark history of the 20th century, specifically the global epidemic of encephalitis lethargica, or the sleepy sickness, that ravaged the world between 1915 and 1926. Millions of people fell into a state of living death. They were conscious, they were aware, but they could not move, speak, or react for decades. They were awake but dead to the world. When medical science finally woke some of these patients in the 1960s using L-DOPA, they described their experience as being a silent observer to their own lives. This medical anomaly proves that the human brain has a default mode, a state where the primitive functions, breathing, movement, basic awareness, can remain active while the higher functions, personality, will, emotion, are completely severed. This is the biological blueprint for the zombie. It suggests that the first zombie might have been a victim of a natural viral mutation that mimicked the effects of the Haitian toxins, creating a person who walked the earth without a soul. As we move from the clinical to the evolutionary, we encounter the most disturbing possibility of all, the zombie as a parasitic strategy. In the insect world, the Ophiocordyceps fungus is a master of neuromanipulation. It infects an ant, grows into its brain, and takes control of its motor functions. The ant is still alive, but it is no longer the ant, it is a vehicle for the fungus. It is forced to climb to a specific height, lock its jaws onto a leaf, and wait for the fungus to erupt from its skull to spread its spores. For a long time, scientists believed the blood-brain barrier and our high body temperature protected humans from such a fate. But as the climate shifts and fungi adapt to higher temperatures, that barrier is weakening. There are already recorded cases of fungal infections in humans that cause profound personality changes and loss of motor control. If we look at the first zombie through this lens, we aren't looking for a person, we are looking for a pathogen that learned how to hijack the human central nervous system. The mystery deepens when we look at the forensic evidence in ancient burials. In parts of Eastern Europe and the Mediterranean, archaeologists have discovered vampire burials and zombie pits dating back thousands of years. These bodies were found with heavy stones wedged into their jaws, stakes driven through their hearts, or were buried face down to confuse the spirit. While often dismissed as superstition, the forensic reality of these remains tells a different story. Many of these individuals suffered from late-stage rabies. Rabies is the closest nature has ever come to a zombie virus. It targets the brain, strips away human logic and empathy, and replaces it with a singular, violent urge to bite and spread the infection. A person with rabies experiences hydrophobia, a fear of water, extreme aggression, and a total loss of self. If an ancient tribe witnessed a member succumb to rabies, they wouldn't see a sick man, they would see a dead man who had been replaced by a monster. This suggests that the zombie has been a part of the human experience since we first began living in close proximity to animals. The first zombie was likely a victim of a viral crossover that turned a human into a biological weapon for the virus. To understand the why behind the zombie, we must look at the how of social control. In Haiti, the creation of a zombie was never random. It was a form of capital punishment administered by the secret societies. It was reserved for those who broke the community's laws, those who were too greedy, too violent, or too disruptive. The Bakr didn't just kill them, they erased them. To be turned into a zombie was to be stripped of your name, your family, and your history. It was a fate worse than death because it was a public demonstration of total power. The cold truth is that the zombie is a tool of social engineering. It is a way for a society to maintain order through the threat of biological erasure. This makes the first zombie a political figure, the first person to be legally deleted while their heart was still beating. The logical tension reaches its peak when we look at modern neuroscience and the Lazarus syndrome. There are documented cases in modern hospitals where patients have spontaneously returned to life after their hearts had stopped and they had been declared dead. In some of these cases, the returned individuals exhibit what doctors call akinetic mutism. They can move their eyes, they can track movement, and they can swallow, but they have no drive, no speech, and no emotion. They are, for all intents and purposes, biological zombies. This indicates that the zombie state is actually a built-in survival mechanism of the human brain. When the system suffers a catastrophic trauma, whether through toxin, virus, or lack of oxygen, the brain shuts down the expensive, energy-hungry prefrontal cortex, the seat of the personality, and focuses all energy on the primitive brain stem. The result is a creature that looks like a human, breathes like a human, but has no humanity left inside. We must now synthesize these clues to find the reveal. The search for the first zombie leads us not to a single person, but to a realization about the fragility of the human ego. The first zombie was likely a prehistoric human who survived a near-fatal head injury or a specific neurotoxic sting from a plant or animal. Their tribe would have watched as the person they knew died, only for the body to keep moving, eating, and staring with empty eyes. This sparked the first myth, the first fear, and eventually, the first attempt by humans to replicate that state through chemistry. The mystery of Clairvius Narcisse was simply a modern echo of a technology that humanity has been perfecting for millennia, the technology of soul erasure. The true horror of the zombie isn't that they want to eat us, it's that we can become them so easily. We are all just a few milligrams of tetrodotoxin, a specific viral mutation, or a catastrophic neurological reboot away from losing the eye that we value so much. The records of the Albert Schweitzer Hospital and the secret rituals of the Haitian hills are not just stories, they are forensic evidence of a glitch in the human machine. The first zombie was the first person to fall into that glitch and stay there. They were the first to prove that the body does not need the soul to survive. As we look at the 20-minute mark of this investigation, the synthesis is clear. The zombie is a multifaceted reality, part pharmacological weapon, part viral byproduct, and part neurological survival mode. It is the shadow of humanity. It is the reminder that our consciousness is a fragile light, and there are many ways to blow it out while leaving the lamp intact. The case of Clairvius Narcisse was never solved because it wasn't a crime, it was a demonstration of a biological truth we aren't ready to accept. The first zombie wasn't a monster from a grave. He was a man who discovered that the most terrifying place to be is inside a body that no longer belongs to you. He was the first to experience the cold truth that in the eyes of nature, and in the hands of those who know its secrets, the human soul is an optional component. The mystery concludes with a final, unsettling data point. When researchers interviewed former zombies who had recovered their faculties, many of them didn't talk about the pain or the hunger. They talked about the silence. They described a state where thoughts simply stopped, where the world became a series of shapes and colors without meaning. They didn't feel like they were someone else, they felt like they were nothing. This is the ultimate information gap closed. The zombie is the physical manifestation of nothingness. The first zombie was the first person to visit that void and return to tell us that the only thing standing between us and the undead is the delicate, chemical balance of our own brains.